4th and 5th grade. As we continue reading My Teacher is an Alien, we are going to start with chapter 16 today. And if you will remember from last time, the kids tried to take pictures of Miss Schwartz in Mr. Smith's house, and their lookout Duncan got caught at the end of the chapter. So here we go, chapter 16, Duncan's Disaster. Peter looked at me. I looked at him. I wondered if he was as terrified as he looked. I wondered if I looked as terrified as I felt. "What's he doing in here?" I whispered. "And what's happening to him?" hissed Peter. "And what are we going to do about it?" I thought. We hesitated for only a second, and then I began to creep down the stairwell. Duncan was still screaming. We had left the door to the attic open in case we needed to make a quick getaway. Poking my head around the edge, I looked in the direction of the screams. They were coming from the room where Mr. Smith sat to take off his mask every night. I reached for Peter's hand. "What should we do?" I mouthed to him. He pointed down the hall and started off with me following close behind. After a couple of steps, we dropped our bellies and slid under the door, up to the door and peeked around the edge. I couldn't believe it. Duncan was all alone. He was standing in front of the mirror, screaming for all he was worth. I can't say as I blamed him. The communicator was on, and Duncan was looking into the bridge of Broxholm's starship, and one of those hideous aliens from the starship was looking back at him, talking to him in a language of growls and shrieks. I took a deep breath and slithered into the room, crawling across the floor as fast as I could move. I scooted right under the table and hit the switch I had seen Broxholm use to turn it off. It made a crackling noise and then fell silent. Duncan stopped screaming. "You idiot!" yelled Peter, jumping into the room. "What are you doing here?" "I got bored," sniveled Duncan. Talk about a short attention span. He couldn't have been out there more than 5 or 10 minutes. "And I wanted to see if you were telling the truth or not," he continued. "So I went around the house and came in through the cellar. This was the only room with anything in it, so I came in. When I touched that switch, that thing started showing up and started growling at me." Duncan was blubbering now, big tears cutting clean paths down his dirty face. He turned to me and he said, "Is that what Mr. Smith really looks like?" I nodded my head. Duncan's eyes rolled back into his head, and he fainted. By the time we got him up on his feet and out of the house, I had only 10 minutes to get back to school. "Maybe I shouldn't go back," I said. Peter shook his head. "You have to," he said. "We can't afford to be more suspicious than we already are. Anyway, I don't think the aliens actually saw you, at least not your face. You stayed down low enough." "What about me?" blubbered Duncan. "What about me?" Peter hesitated. "You'll have to hide out at my house," he said. "It's the last place anyone would think to look for you. If you stay there, you may be safe. Get going, Susan. You've got to get back to school as soon as possible. Don't worry about the pictures. I'll take care of that. Just move." I hopped on my bike and headed for school. By riding extra hard, I got there just about the time my lesson was supposed to be ending, but I was all hot and sweaty when I sneaked back in. Even worse, I ran into Mr. Bamwick the moment I walked through the door. He was furious. "Susan, where have you been?" he shouted. "I've spent the last 40 minutes waiting for you. We've got a concert in 2 days, and my star soloist can't even show up for her lesson." I did the only thing I could think of. I started to cry. It wasn't hard to do since I was on the edge of tears anyway. "I'm sorry, Mr. Bamwick," I sobbed. "I was just so scared, and I couldn't come to my lesson." Wow, so far so good. I was actually managing to tell him something that was pretty close to the truth. But then I felt bad because Mr. Bamwick, who's a really good guy, got upset about scaring me and started apologizing for putting me under so much pressure. In the end, it worked out better than I could have imagined. Mr. Bamwick went to Mr. Smith and explained to him that there was a problem with my lesson, and since we had this important concert coming, would it be possible for him to keep me a little while longer, and so on. It was great. I had a real excuse, and I had even gotten to work on my solo. Back in class, things were pretty quiet, until before the end of the day when Mike Ferrand started throwing spitballs at Stacy. I wondered if the two of them weren't actually enjoying themselves. After all, they had been so well behaved for the last several years that maybe this was the perfect chance for them to let off a little steam. But it wasn't Stacy and Michael who were asked to stay after school that day. No, that honor was reserved for yours truly. I was sitting at my desk thinking that maybe we had actually gotten away with our little photo session when Mr. Smith walked up to me and said, "Miss Simmons, I want you to stay after school. I need to talk to you." It was amazing how 2 such simple sentences could teach me whole new levels of fear. Chapter 17, Teacher Conference. The other kids had left. I was alone with the alien. At least Stacy had lingered at the door for a few minutes until Mr. Smith turned to her and said, "It's time for you to go, Miss Benoit. I want to speak to Miss Simmons in private." Stacy looked at me with an expression that said, "I tried," and then she hurried away. Broxholm walked over and straddled the chair in front of my desk. He leaned toward me. "I know what you did today," he said. "Oh," was all I could manage. I felt as if someone had dropped an ice cube into my heart. The worst thing was I couldn't even be sure what he meant. Did he know I'd skipped my piccolo lesson, or did he know that I was inside his house? I looked through the door and wondered if I would ever go through it again as a living person. "Well," said Broxholm. "I'm sorry," I whispered. It was about all that my voice was good for at this point. It was so vague, and I just didn't know what to say. I wasn't even sure what to say I was sorry for. Broxholm looked at me. "I don't understand why you dislike me so much, Susan," he said. "I'm just trying to do what's right for this class. Yet you've been hostile to me from the moment I walked through that door. What an actor! I wondered if I would ever be that good." It was amazing how he was still pretending to be just a teacher who was having trouble with one of his students. Suddenly he rose and crossed the room to close the door. "Now," he said, sitting down in front of me again, "let's be honest with each other, shall we, Miss Simmons?" Should I say something? Should I tell him I knew his secret? "Why are you here anyway?" I said at last, still playing his game of not saying anything that couldn't be taken at least two ways. "I'm here to learn," he said smoothly. "After all, isn't that what school is for?" Creep, I thought, but out loud I said, "I thought you were supposed to be the teacher." I tried to keep my voice from cracking, but it did anyway. Broxholm shifted in his chair. "A good teacher is always learning," he said. "Education is a process of give and take. I have to take certain things in order to learn. Look at all I've taken from this class already. I've taken a lot of nonsense. I've taken a lot of snottiness." Suddenly he turned and looked at me. "And I'll have to take a few more things in order to learn all that I can, if you take my meaning, Miss Simmons." I shrank back in terror. I don't know how he did it, but I could actually see his alien eyes beneath his mask, as if they were burning with a light of their own. "And I won't take kindly to any interfering with my educational mission," he said in a voice without any emotion. He had picked up a copy of Rockets and Flags as he talked. Now he began to squeeze it. I watched his fingers sink right into the cover, compressing the paper with the power of his grip. I heard a horrible thumping sound. I glanced around to see where it was coming from, then realized it was the beating of my own heart. "The universe is a very big place, Susan," said Broxholm gently. He dropped the book. His finger left dents a half-inch deep in the cover. If only I could get the book out of here, I would have proof of what he was. But of course he had no intention of letting me have the book. He picked it up and carried it to his briefcase. "A very big place indeed," he said, "and there are more things going on in it than you can possibly imagine. It's important to learn all we can. Otherwise, terrible things can happen. That's my job, to prevent terrible things. Can you understand that, Miss Simmons?" I shook my head. Maybe I should say I shook my head harder, since I was already shaking my head. He sighed. "Well, perhaps someday you will," he said. "For now, I simply want you to know it is the wisest and safest course not to interfere with your elders." He closed his briefcase. "I will see you tomorrow, Miss Simmons. I trust that you will spend the entire day here in my classroom and not enter my home again." I almost fell off my chair. He had known all along. Before I could say anything, he went out the door, leaving me alone. Alright guys, we're going to stop that video here, and we will have the next chapters in the next video. See you later.